Hello, today is Monday, June 10th, and welcome to episode 346 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Morgan Vinia. I'm joined today by NSI's Deputy Executive Director, Jessica Jones, and my fellow Senior Fellow, Lester Munson. Today, we are discussing the deteriorating situation in Sudan as fighting between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces intensifies. On Wednesday, the RSF raided the village of al-Nour, killing 150 people, including 35 children, and injuring at least 200. This attack is the largest in a series of recent raids the RSF has carried out in the Al-Jazira state, an agriculturally rich region in Sudan. The attack was met with international condemnation, and on Thursday, the SAF vowed retaliation. Now, the Sudanese civil war broke out last April in 2023, because of a power struggle between General Hamedi of the RSF and General Burhan of the SAF. Since then, the conflict has resulted in the death of more than 15,000 people and the displacement of more than 8 million. In December, the U.S. State Department concluded that both sides had committed war crimes and that the RSF and its allied militias have been engaging in ethnic cleansing. While millions of Sudanese people are struggling to survive and flee the violence, neighboring countries are also struggling to control violence and instability in their own territories, leading to concerns that the war in Sudan could escalate into a wider regional conflict. Les, taking a step back here, broadening the aperture, given that Sudan is surrounded by a lot of other countries that are vulnerable to conflict and instability, that have experienced their own internal tumult, how might continued fighting in Sudan and the displacement of civilians affect neighboring countries like Chad, Ethiopia, and the broader region?
Well, it's bad. The situation's terrible in Sudan. It's not good for Sudan's neighbors. An alarmingly high number of other actors in the region are involved in this conflict. UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Russia, Egypt, others are seeking some kind of advantage in this very tragic civil war situation in Sudan. We should point out Sudan has been riven by internal conflict for decades. This goes back a long, long time. There are no easy answers here. The Biden administration has sent out Special Envoy Tom Perriello to try to bring the sides to some sort of ceasefire situation. I'm not sure he's got the gravitas to really achieve that. This is affecting thousands, it is killing thousands of people. Millions are having their lives totally disrupted. This is as bad a humanitarian situation as we've seen on the planet in recent years. It's really quite serious, and it's getting worse. The UN has been irrelevant and ineffective. Our usual tools are not working. I think there's no easy answer here. The U.S. does need to be thinking about, again, and we talk about this, I think, repeatedly whenever these issues in North Africa and the Sahel and the Horn of Africa come up. We need to change our toolbox. We need to have programs and policies that give us the ability to impact things on the ground. It seems like we're too often on the sidelines, unable to act in a way that has a positive impact on the ground. And I'm not talking about U.S. military involvement or anything like that, but UN peacekeeping, which has been occasionally an effective tool in the past, could it be used here? Have we undermined that tool too much? We should be asking ourselves a lot of kind of long-term questions about whether we're spending our money in the right way to achieve the goals we want to achieve in the world.
Mm-hmm. So Jess, we hear a lot about the conflicts in Ukraine, the conflict in Gaza, what's going on in other parts of the world here, but a lot less about Sudan's civil war. Why is Sudan's stability important to U.S. security interests in the region?
I think, unfortunately for those suffering in Sudan, to your point, Morgan, so much focus, rightly so, has been on what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East. And it wasn't until early this year, even though the State Department came out, as you said, in December, speaking of war crimes and genocide, that we have a special envoy, even, attached to this mission, who, as Les pointed out, hasn't really gotten far. The two sides don't seem like they're even at the negotiation table. And, Sudan is a country of 50 million people. Its instability could, spill over to the entire entire region. It's been a stronghold for militant groups, terrorism, all kinds of, so the flow of weapons, migrants, terrorist groups. I mean, stability is incredibly important in this country. And, I think rightly so, many are criticizing the Biden administration for not focusing enough attention. You've got some motions on the Hill. I think there's, talk of a resolution about the genocide. You've got a few Democrats introducing a bill to prohibit sales to the UAE, and some calling for the U.S. to put a little more pressure on UAE publicly for they're the largest supporter of the RSF right now, as the RSF, gets a stranglehold on El Fasher, which is a huge city with about 3 million folks who could be under serious threat if they were to take over the city. And so I think there's rightly so a conversation of like, how does the U.S. leverage itself to get the two sides to the table?
Yeah. Hey, Morgan, if I can jump in, I think there's totally agree with Jones. There's some other even more kind of concrete things we need to be concerned about. Stability in Egypt, the biggest Arab country in terms of population, is inextricably linked to Sudan. The Nile originates in Ethiopia, goes through Sudan, ends up in Egypt. Egypt's economy is completely dependent on Nile waters. And so there's some obvious linkages there. Sudan is also, the conflict there inevitably spills out into Ethiopia, which is 100 million plus people who are also vulnerable to a lot of conflict and food insecurity and things like that. But also, when Sudan has historically been the nexus for global terrorism. Let's not forget Osama bin Laden was based there for many years. He was involved in the politics, the very nasty politics of Sudan. So the things that happen there tend to metastasize and emerge in other places around the globe. So just letting this thing go and kind of taking a waiver on it isn't going to be in U.S. national interest at all. Our interest is in making sure this is resolved as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no, one proxy that we haven't really talked about lately is Russia and the role that Wagner is playing in Sudan. They've been there for some time. They've been very present throughout Africa, particularly Central African Republic. We've seen them in parts of the Sahel. They are, they are well established, as I said, in Sudan. And so, what do you think that the Russian presence there portends for U.S. interests? Last, I'll go with you first.
Well, this is, we've seen this, of course, in other countries. Wagner Group being involved in Chad, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, in other places in that kind of belt from the Sahel to the Horn of Africa. That may be the kind of the emerging global threat, are these weak nations that are inextricably linked to Moscow through resource exploitation and human exploitation and that kind of thing. This is also a global problem, and it's, the more it happens in Sudan, the easier it's going to be to metastasize somewhere else.
Interestingly, you see the Wagner Group really siding with the RSF, but that's not to say that there aren't ties between the SAF and Moscow. They have official SAF officials going this week to Moscow to curry favor. You've got more support coming from Iran to the SAF. I mean, there's a host of international, folks tied into this conflict. Sometimes, right, as example here, playing kind of both sides of the coin.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks, y'all. That is a wrap. Thanks to Devlin Burney, Claude Jennings, Alice Roosevelt, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Wednesday, June 12th, which happens to be my birthday, for our next episode of Fault Lines. Fault Lines is now on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and wish me a happy birthday.